Okay, and happy to be welcoming back for his second appearance on Speaking of Data, David Stodder, the Senior Director of Research for Business Intelligence at TDWI. Thanks for joining us today, Dave. How are you?
Good, Andrew. How you doing?
Doing really well.
Good.
Excited to get this conversation started here. The topic for today's conversation is going to be strategies for overcoming data silos, something that I'm sure a lot of our audience members are having to deal with here. Dave, before we get into the challenges and strategy aspects of this conversation, can you maybe just have a brief definition for what a data silo is? What that might be for folks?
Sure. Well, in my presentation, sometimes I just show, I pick up something from an Iowa farm or something that shows silos out there, and you see all these things kind of lined up, not connected to each other. Of course, probably some farms would say, wait, those are connected, but a lot of times they're not. And so I think that's the visual really is a silo. It's something that's just big, contains data. Sometimes it's not transparent. You don't know exactly what's in it. It's not connected to everything else. Um, there are different types of silos. That's the thing. I mean, we may get into this in our conversation, but business applications have different silos. Like say you have an ERP system or a CRM system. They have their own silos, often legacy silos like mainframe systems. That's a big problem in organizations as they're, maturing, they still have these mainframe systems or older kind of data platforms that they still need that data. That's still important data. They may need to keep it legally for some reason. And so that's a silo. And then you have distributed data marts. I mean, we've had lots of BI systems the organizations have developed over the years, or they may have developed for OLAP or different kinds of analytics and set up a separate data silo or a data mart, I should say, for that. It may not be connected to, it may not, in other words, be an integrated data mart with a data warehouse. It could be a disparate data mart. Thinking of that, there's Excel or just any kind of spreadsheet system or desktop databases. Those are often silos. And then some newer things, organizations are migrating to the cloud, and it's really easy to set up cloud systems, which is one of the great things about the cloud. Of course, the other side of that is that it's so easy that people are just setting up, databases or even data warehouses or data marts really in the cloud. And these are kind of disconnected, not under control, not well managed. And so those become issues. And then another area that I'm kind of looking at is edge devices, data on edge devices where it's physically located near a user or near a machine. And these collect and process and they execute data. And usually they're coordinated and managed centrally, but maybe not. And then sometimes the data architecture might change. And so organizations need to remember, oh yeah, we had those edge devices out there that are doing this. And are they storing data? And is that data managed and governed? So you can see there's a lot of different kinds of different data silos.
Yeah, I think that helps frame the conversation for those that may just not be aware of what that terminology refers to.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, there's many different ways that data silos can be formed, and they seem to be a major problem for organizations based on the research that we found at TDWI.
Yeah.
So why are there so many data silos, and how do they become a problem?
I think it's just the way systems evolve as part of it. And I think in a way, thinking of that, there are probably always going to be data silos. It's always going to be a concern in organizations as they mature, adopt new database systems, new business applications. They might have a merger and acquisition or kind of reorganize the business around different subsidiaries, or they might go into a new sales channel or a new marketing channel. And so they have different kinds of data. I mean, of course, today we're having just an absolute data explosion. So it's not just transactional data or business application data we're thinking about with silos, but organizations are setting up data lakes to have semi or unstructured data. So there may not be just one data lake. There could be multiple data lakes on different cloud data storage systems. And so I think that's part of the way to view it is that it's not really a problem that's ever going to go away. I mean, there may be some organizations that are kind of solving it better than others, but there's always going to be a generation of new silos. And in terms of the issues that they cause. I guess we were going to talk about why those are problems. And, you can just imagine a lot of data redundancy happens and duplication. The data might be inconsistent, particularly like if you can examine, I mean, imagine like customer data that could be spread across CRM systems, marketing systems. There could be, maybe in an insurance company, there's policies and sort of that whole driving systems that are driving those policies. They may contain customer data. So in other words, customer data could be distributed all over the place and be in silos. And this is actually, it's with customer data that often the silo issue becomes such a problem, because you can't get a single view of a customer or a householding view. Like, is this customer related to that customer? So it becomes a very difficult problem.
Right. And so, as you alluded to it, it may not be a problem that is a quick fix or possibly ever be completely solved. But you did mention that there's some organizations that are working towards solving this. What have you found in regards to how they're trying to solve this problem?
Well, I think one is sort of recognizing what do they need to solve. And, data governance often rises right to the top, because particularly thinking again of the customer data issue, there's regulations out there that are governing whether you have sensitive customer data, personally identifiable information, the PII. And, so organizations are really under legal pressure to get their hands around that, or their arms around that kind of data. And so organizations are taking different strategies. Some I've talked to, they're trying to pull all their customer data into one system. So they're consolidating all their customer data. But that may not be practical given the numerous channels, sales channels, different marketing programs they have. And then if it's a large organization, different subsidiaries and, geographically dispersed. I mean, often one issue in governance is that the data can't be consolidated. It can't be moved because it needs to stay in that region to adhere to a regulation. So the data governance is often one of the big drivers. And so that often drives the solutions. I think one thing is to think about is that it's a multifaceted problem in terms of, like, it's a people problem, it's a process problem, it's a data management problem, and then technology issues as related to those. And so the people issues are around data ownership. People don't always want to give up their control of their data, understandably so, because they may not trust other sources of data. There may be suspicious about what's in it for me, in terms of if I use a shared data source. And so those are kind of people issues that need to be solved at a people level by leadership, by centers of excellence, those kinds of things. And then, the data management and data integration process issues could be old. It could be legacy systems that need to be modernized. And so there again, organizations, a lot of them are moving to the cloud. But as I mentioned, sometimes the cloud, can exacerbate the data silo problem. But a lot of it is trying to consolidate data in the cloud, use that power of these incredibly scalable cloud platforms to pull all these data silos together. The other side of the coin, though, is that if that's not going to work, you have to look at distributed data solutions. And so there's a whole class of solutions that are developing there. I mean, some have been around for a while. Data virtualization is a very mature solution. So that's the opposite side of the solution really is to, rather than consolidate, to try to use that middleware layer effectively to help you govern the data, to manage access to the data, to optimize queries centrally, virtually centrally, I guess you could say, in the middleware layer, so that users can access distributed sources effectively. So there's really not a one-size-fits-all solution to the problem.
So are there technology trends that will help organizations solve the data silo problems that you're seeing? Maybe not, used abundantly in the moment, but potentially might be gaining some traction in the future?
Yeah, and I think they divide out in many ways into the sort of consolidation strategy and the distributed strategy. And so there are technology trends and solutions kind of related to both that are important to look at. In terms of consolidation, cloud consolidation is kind of where everybody's going these days, to try to build that, as I mentioned, the kind of big unified data lakes, data warehouses in the cloud, and then of course now data lake houses in the cloud. So that, in a sense, is really a consolidation plan as well, is to look at, you have data lakes, you have data warehouses. Why not bring it together? Because you have a lot of users that need both kinds of data. You can, reduce some of the management complexity that you have around the system. So that's an important trend to watch. And so organizations are looking at silos and seeing if they can consolidate them. And then, as I mentioned, it's not just a technical issue, but having to resolve data ownership issues so that everyone's comfortable with the idea of consolidating the data. And then on the distributed side, as I mentioned, data virtualization is a pretty mature solution. So that's definitely one to look at. And what's been building off of that is the idea of data fabrics and data mesh. So that's kind of the new terminology for a lot of these. And again, a lot of them are focused on particularly, number one being governance. How can you use data mesh and data fabrics to make governance more effective? There's similarities and differences between data fabrics and data mesh. It's probably the topic of an entire podcast in itself, but so it's more complicated than we can explain now. But data fabrics, that often is around governance and trying to create that kind of unified architecture so you can improve access, governance, security, things like that over this distributed architecture that you have. And whereas data mesh, it has some of that, but it's also more around the idea that you are going to have these domains, you're going to have these users who are working together in teams. And so what's really important to the business is to make sure they have what they need in terms of data. And so in a sense, that kind of honors the I don't want to say silo, because it's not necessarily a silo, but really just what those users need, what that domain needs, maybe layer governance on top of that so that that's dealt with, and also create a good balance there between what are central enterprise resources and what the users in the teams and the domains need, and not try to overdo it in either way. And I think that the one virtue of that is that not all data needs to be consolidated, that it's okay to leave some data where it is. So organizations, instead of trying to, basically boil the ocean, as some might say, try to be more practical and targeted about how they're solving the problems. And I think most organizations will need really a mix of the consolidation strategy and the distributed strategy. So they should really be looking at all of those things. In the distributed area, there's distributed SQL engines that are that's an interesting area that's sort of developing. Is how organizations can synchronize replication. So, really reducing it to almost real-time replication, whereas replication used to be something that was done in batch. And so that was one thing that kind of drove a lot of the generation of data silos, is that users couldn't wait around for these replication processes to occur. But that's the latency is really being contracted considerably in those areas. And errors too. Lots of, you can build in software routines and sort of the end-to-end lifecycle to pick up, cleanse the data, pick up data quality errors, formatting errors, and things like that much faster. So that's important. I think another area that I should mention is also data catalogs. Data catalogs are kind of also in that sort of middle area of solutions between the sources and the users and the data sources. And so what the data catalog does is it resolves the data definitions, how the data is defined, how it's organized, allows organizations to build inventories, which are critical for data governance and just knowing where the data is. So it makes it easier for users to find the data. It makes it easier to spot inconsistencies and data quality issues. And so a data catalog sitting in the middle is very important. Some data catalogs use knowledge graphs, or you might have a knowledge graph solution that can be faster at understanding data relationships and also mapping those relationships and saving that in a database. And so that can be useful too, is to have a knowledge graph kind of solution to understand how are these different data silos or data that's in these silos related. So I think, organizations should really be looking at all those things because they might have reasons to use each one.
Yeah, I think that's probably really helpful for folks out there that might be looking for options, just to be aware of the different technologies that can help them with this. So I guess the last question I have for you, Dave, is you've outlined a lot of different options and resources for folks, but what do you think are perhaps some of the best practices for overcoming data silos that you're seeing working well? And if you just answered that question, then so be it. But if perhaps you might be able to summarize.
Yeah, I could sort of summarize and sort of close it up. I think one is, looking at it as not just a technology issue and not just a data management issue, but look at the people issues and process issues. And there you want to get your chief data officer, your chief information officer together, maybe develop a center of excellence where you're having a lot of the stakeholders coming together to solve problems around data ownership and data sharing. And so look at those. Because there's not, it's not one answer for everything. You want to develop a balance between those, the self-service users who want flexibility and independence. They want to control their domain, so to speak, and the powers of the enterprise solutions, the more global solutions that can reduce redundancy, help you reduce costs, because often silos are a real cost driver. It costs a lot of money to manage all these different systems. You often have different licenses for them and all that kind of stuff. So, so you have to balance that too. The cost issues. How does that work out? And it can help you capture. You look for solutions that can, like a data catalog or things related to that, that can help you have a better idea of where the data is, what kind of condition it's in. Where there are inconsistencies and quality issues. So that kind of layer is helpful. I think look at data governance is often a driver to deal with these silos. And so if you've got governance issues, that might be the thing that's really kind of guiding how you're going to solve it. I think related to the people issues, data literacy. We talk a lot about data literacy at TDWI, and we have various courses about it. But that's important too, because part of the data literacy is not just helping different types of users understand data and interpret what they're seeing, but also to have responsibility and accountability for the data and to really understand where it could be valuable to be able to use central resources rather than their own silo, and where the sharing and all that can be helpful. And then speaking of sharing, one last thing I'll mention is we're seeing a lot of development in data marketplaces and exchanges. So that's kind of an interesting development too, where the services, but this can be really internal to an organization or externally for partners and maybe even customers in some cases, to access the data. So there you can prepare a service that is well-governed, it's trusted data, is fit for purpose, that you're basically making available through a marketplace or a data exchange. And that way, users may be less motivated to develop their own data silo because they can depend on going to find the data at this marketplace or exchange. Basically, a system that facilitates data sharing, which can be helpful and less expensive.
That's great. I think you laid out a really nice summary. Thanks for doing that. You did mention a couple pieces of the TDWI research. Is there any in particular that you'd like to share with the audience that they might be able to go onto our website and download if they're interested in learning more about this?
Well, yeah, I think, my colleagues Fern Halper and Jim Kabilis have been writing things, and I've had my best practice report. It came out right at the tail end of last year, covers a lot of things about data integration and data silos. So look for the Q4 2022. I'm actually just about to start revving the engines to work on my best practice report for 2023. And I'll be talking about silos quite a bit in that and how to solve them, because it's also going to be kind of around data management, data integration issues. Yeah, so I think that people will find, I should be more specific, but people can find lots of resources at TWI through our checklists and playbooks we've been publishing recently, and then the best practices reports.
For all those listening, if you're interested, you can always stop by tdwi.org and check out our research and resource center as well for a wealth of information there. So Dave, with that, I'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. I really appreciate you stopping by today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Andrew. It's been fun talking about this.
Yeah.